It was an ordinary day at the bustling VIB airport. The air hummed with the sounds of travelers, the soft murmur of flight announcements echoing through the terminal, and the comforting scent of coffee wafted from nearby cafes. Amidst this typical airport scene, a quiet elderly man named Henry Whitmore made his way toward his assigned seat. To the casual observer, he was just another passenger. However, the ordinary atmosphere was abruptly shattered. Before Henry even settled in, security personnel suddenly converged upon him. "Sir, we need you to come with us," a guard stated with cold authority. The surrounding passengers gasped, a wave of confused whispers rippling through the cabin. Little did they know, Henry was far from an ordinary, frail old man. He was on the verge of setting in motion a chain of events that would shake the airline to its very core. One phone call was all it would take. The day had begun under a blanket of gray, the overcast sky mirroring the uneventful routine of the airport. Travelers hurried towards their respective gates, their rolling suitcases adding to the steady hum of activity. Within this flow of people, Henry Whitmore stood out subtly. His weathered face spoke of a life rich with experience, and his quiet demeanor seemed out of sync with the surrounding bustle. His destination was Los Angeles, but his presence held an unseen significance. Sarah, a young flight attendant, briefly noted Henry as he headed towards a first-class seat. Her professional gaze quickly scanned his creased brown coat, his slightly stooped posture, and the worn leather briefcase he carried. A slight frown creased her brow. "That seat is reserved," she murmured to herself, though Henry, with his calm and deliberate pace, didn't seem to hear. He continued down the aisle, the soft click of his shoes against the polished floor a quiet counterpoint to the surrounding noise. His every step seemed determined, his eyes fixed ahead with an air of quiet certainty. Soon, hushed whispers began to circulate among the first-class passengers. Several people openly stared as Henry settled into the plush seat. A businessman in an expensive suit raised a condescending eyebrow, leaning towards the woman beside him. "He must have gotten the wrong ticket," he snickered softly. Henry, seemingly oblivious to the attention, closed his eyes and let out a small sigh, a hint of relief in his posture as the final boarding announcements were made. But the whispers persisted. Sarah, the flight attendant, returned, her voice now barely audible as she spoke urgently to a uniformed security guard who had appeared near the gate. "That man in seat 1A, she whispered, her tone conveying a sense of urgency. "He shouldn't be there." The guard's brow furrowed, and he began to move purposefully towards the front of the cabin, his polished boots clicking ominously on the floor. Henry had just begun to relax when he felt a firm tap on his shoulder. He opened his eyes to find the serious face of the security guard looking down at him. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a mistake. You're in the wrong seat," the guard stated, his tone impersonal and cold. Henry blinked slowly, surprised by the interruption. "This is my seat," he replied calmly, holding up his boarding pass. The guard glanced at the pass, then back at Henry, his expression unchanged. "Please follow me," he said sharply. Confused and a little unsteady, Henry rose from his seat, his joints protesting with soft creaks. The surrounding passengers watched in a tense silence, some exchanging bewildered glances, others pointedly looking away, pretending not to notice the unfolding drama. Henry followed the guard down the aisle, his face betraying little emotion, but his mind racing with questions. What had he done wrong? As they reached the aircraft door, the guard turned to him again, his words delivering a shocking blow. "Sir, we have to ask you to leave the aircraft." The words hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. "Leave?" Henry repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "But I'm in my seat." The guard remained impassive. "Please, sir, we are following protocol." And just like that, Henry was escorted off the plane. The murmurs of the remaining passengers grew louder as the door hissed shut behind him, leaving him standing on the cold, unforgiving tarmac. The steel of the gate seemed to mock his bewildered state. His heart pounded, but his outward demeanor remained composed. No one on that plane, no one in that airport, understood who he truly was, the power he held within his grasp. Standing alone outside, Henry took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had one call to make. Just one. The moment his fingers dialed the familiar number, everything was about to change. The airline that had so carelessly dismissed him was about to face the consequences. For Henry Whitmore was not just a wrongly ejected elderly man. He was the man who could bring them to their knees with a single phone call. He would take everything from them. The story of his quiet revenge would shake the airline world to its core. But no one, not even Henry, could have predicted how this would all unfold. Henry's fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number. A brief hum filled the silence before a voice on the other end spoke, clear, calm, and confident. "Mr. Whitmore, how can I help you today?" It was George Gray, the CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the world, Henry's firm, the one Henry owned. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to stand still. Henry took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. The chaos of the airport, the casual laughter, the dismissive whispers, the cold sting of humiliation, it all felt distant now, almost unreal. His voice was steady when he finally spoke. "George, I need you to do something for me. Something big." His words were calm, yet they carried an undeniable weight of authority. A long pause stretched across the line. Then, a subtle shift in George's tone. His voice became more attentive. "Anything you need, Mr. Whitmore." "What is it?" Henry closed his eyes briefly. The guard's face, the sneering look of the man who had forced him off the plane, were etched in his memory. The humiliation had been profound. But now, Henry's mind was razor-sharp. He had witnessed such moments countless times in his life. People underestimating him, believing they could push him around. They had no idea who they were dealing with. "Pull all of our funding from that airline," Henry stated, his voice even. "$4 billion. Every last cent." Another pause followed, this time filled with disbelief. "Mr. Whitmore, are you sure? That is an enormous sum. Do you really want to?" I said pull it. Now. George did not hesitate. "Understood, sir. I will handle it immediately." Henry could almost hear the rapid calculations in George's mind, the swift processing of the immense request. But it was already done. The call was over, the decision made, and the chain of events irrevocably set in motion. Henry stood still for a moment, letting the enormity of his actions sink in. He had been thrown off the plane, humiliated. But in that instant, Henry Whitmore knew something no one else could comprehend. The airline had just made a catastrophic mistake, one that would cost them everything. As the echoes of the tarmac seemed to whisper around him, Henry walked away from the airport gate. His steps were slow, deliberate. He could feel the curious gazes of others, but he paid them no mind. He had made his call. Now, the real work was about to begin. Back at the airline's headquarters, chaos was already erupting. George had acted with swift precision, summoning the entire finance team and instructing them to withdraw every single penny of their investment. The pressure was immense, but George was not one to back down from a challenge. As the news spread like wildfire through the company, executives scrambled to understand the sudden, devastating loss of billions. Panic began to grip them, but it was far too late to reverse the tide. Henry had already won the first battle. It would not be long before the world discovered the CEO who had dismissed an elderly man, the security guard who had been so quick to humiliate him. They would all soon realize the gravity of their error. The airline, once a giant in the industry, now teetered on the brink of financial ruin, all orchestrated by one quiet phone call from Henry Whitmore. As he left the airport behind, Henry's mind was already moving to the next phase. This was merely the beginning. The airline would soon learn the true cost of arrogance, a price far greater than they could ever imagine. Making his way to his car, the cold evening air nipping at his skin, Henry felt a strange sense of calm. There was no need for haste. The damage was already done. The swift withdrawal of $4 billion would send shockwaves through their entire operation. But Henry's plan was far from over. This was just the initial move in a much larger game. He knew that once the news broke, the world's media would descend upon the airline, demanding answers. The executives would be in a desperate scramble to extinguish the financial inferno Henry had ignited. Yet, his target was not solely the airline's finances. The arrogance that ran through its veins, the ingrained belief that they could treat people as mere pawns in their corporate game. Henry had been a pawn once. He vividly remembered the lean years, the struggle to make ends meet, the dismissive way he had been treated by the very type of people who now believed they held the power to crush him. They had underestimated him then, just as they had today. And now, he was going to make them pay the full price. His phone vibrated in his pocket, pulling him from his intense thoughts. He retrieved it, his eyes scanning the screen. It was a message from George. The funds have been pulled. The media is already swarming with questions. I've informed the board, and they are in an emergency meeting right now. A small, satisfied smile touched Henry's lips. It was unfolding even faster than he had anticipated. The tension was palpable, the pressure mounting. The airline's leadership would be utterly lost, with no idea how to recover from such a devastating blow. They would be turning on each other, desperately seeking someone to blame for their catastrophic failure. And through it all, Henry would remain a silent observer, watching as their world crumbled around them. But Henry's plan extended beyond mere financial ruin. He had a final, devastating move in mind, one that would ensure they never forgot the lesson he was about to teach them. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about the fundamental balance of power. As Henry merged onto the main highway, his thoughts shifted to the airline CEO, the man who had so casually ordered his removal, the man who had laughed, assuming Henry was just another insignificant face in the crowd, someone utterly disposable. The CEO had no inkling of the storm he had just unleashed. Henry had meticulously done his research. He knew everything about the CEO, his family, his investments, his deepest vulnerabilities. And Henry had a precise plan to exploit them all. He would be the one to decide when the CEO's carefully constructed empire would shatter. The airline's downfall would be a mere prelude to the personal destruction Henry intended to unleash upon him. The CEO had made one fatal mistake that day. He had treated Henry Whitmore as if he were nothing. Now, Henry was going to ensure the world knew exactly who he was. He was going to change everything, not just for this arrogant airline, but for every person who had ever been overlooked, disrespected, or humiliated. As Henry arrived at his home, he paused at the front door. There was no turning back now. The game had begun. The pieces were in motion, and soon, the world would witness the full extent of Henry Whitmore's capabilities. As the morning sun gradually painted the city with a soft glow, Henry sat in his study, his gaze fixed on the phone in his hand. It felt as though the world had tilted on its axis overnight. The single phone call, the one that held the power to change everything, had already sent shockwaves rippling through the industry. The airline stock had plummeted, rumors were spreading like wildfire, and it was only a matter of time before the world uncovered the identity of the silent force behind the storm. His phone buzzed once more, breaking his concentration. He glanced at the screen. It was a call from George. He answered quickly, his heart beating a fraction faster than usual. Henry. George's voice was tight, with urgency. The media is everywhere. They're demanding answers. The CEO is in full damage control mode. They're scrambling, but this is bad. They have absolutely no idea what hit them. A quiet satisfaction resonated within Henry. Good, he replied calmly. Let them panic. Let them feel the crushing weight of their mistake. A brief silence hung in the air. Then, George's voice, heavy with concern, broke through. Henry, you understand what you've done, right? This is bigger than just money now. The entire industry is watching. They will retaliate. You have to be ready. I have been ready for years, George. Henry's voice was steady, unwavering. This was never about the money. This is about something far greater than that. It's about sending a message. The line fell silent again, the weight of Henry's words settling heavily. George understood then. It had never been solely about financial gain. It was about dismantling a system, about showing the world that true power did not solely reside in the hands of the wealthy and the seemingly untouchable. Henry had been humiliated once, but now, he was the one holding all the strings. You have a plan, don't you? George asked, his voice tinged with both awe and concern. I do, Henry replied, his tone firm. And it is about to unfold. The airline CEO, he is the target. But this will go deeper. I want him to feel the weight of every person who has ever been dismissed, disrespected, or crushed by people like him. The world will know that they are not untouchable. Just as Henry finished speaking, his phone vibrated again. He glanced down at the screen to see an alert from a news outlet. Breaking news. Airline CEO faces criticism as $4 billion investment withdrawn. Henry's plan was working. The first wave of public scrutiny had begun, and it was only going to intensify. But this was merely the opening move. He wasn't just going to let the CEO squirm. Henry's mind was already calculating his next step. A corporate titan like him would have enemies, and Henry knew precisely how to exploit those connections. He had learned long ago that true power wasn't solely about possessing vast wealth. It was about understanding who held the crucial strings and knowing exactly how to pull them. I need to make a call, Henry said to George, his tone suddenly sharp and businesslike. Give me everything on the CEO's personal life. Every weakness, every secret. I want to know everything. George hesitated for a fraction of a second. You'll have it. I'll send it over as soon as I can. Henry hung up, his mind already racing with possibilities. The media frenzy was just a small taste of what was to come. Now that the airline's leadership was teetering on the edge, it was time for the final, decisive move. Henry would ensure the CEO would never forget the day he made the fatal mistake of crossing Henry Whitmore. As the day progressed, Henry methodically set his plan into motion. He was patient, meticulous, ensuring every piece fell perfectly into place. Once it was complete, there would be no turning back. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Henry stood by the window of his penthouse, gazing out over the sprawling cityscape. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, but his focus was elsewhere. His plan was nearing fruition, and there was no turning back. Every move he had made had been carefully calculated, every person he had spoken to strategically chosen. He had already begun to reshape their world in his image. Now, with the final piece of the puzzle about to fall into place, he was poised to bring everything to its ultimate conclusion. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from George. They have gone into full panic mode. The CEO is reportedly being questioned by law enforcement. Media outlets are demanding answers. It's only a matter of time before they realize the extent of what they have lost. Henry smiled, his fingers idly swirling the amber liquid in his glass of scotch. The gentle clinking of ice was the only sound that broke the silence. Good, he whispered. Let them panic. Let them feel the consequences of their actions. But Henry knew that destroying the airline's reputation wasn't enough. He needed the CEO to personally feel the sting of every individual who had ever been mistreated by the elite. Henry's plan had never been about a simple financial settlement. It was about sending a powerful message to the entire industry, to those who believed they could play God with the lives of others, to those who thought their wealth and influence would shield them from the repercussions of their arrogance. A sudden knock at the door interrupted Henry's thoughts. He set down his drink and moved to open it. Standing before him was a young man, sharply dressed in a tailored suit. The man stepped inside, handing Henry a sealed envelope. Everything is ready, Mr. Whitmore, the man said with a respectful nod. It is all in place. Henry took the envelope, feeling its weight in his hands. This was it, the final step. He carefully opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. Inside was a legal document, one that held the power to change everything. It was a demand for the full $4 billion investment to be returned, plus significant interest, within a strict 48-hour deadline. Failure to comply would result in the public exposure of the CEO's darkest secrets, secrets that would utterly destroy his career and his life. Henry now held all the cards. It was time to make the call that would end it all. He dialed the familiar number, his hands surprisingly steady despite the surge of adrenaline coursing through him. "Mr. Whitmore," the voice on the other end answered, trembling slightly. I did not expect to hear from you so soon." "I have what I need," Henry said calmly, his voice cool and collected. "But if you want to avoid the complete fallout, you will comply with my demands. I suggest you start thinking about damage control. You have 48 hours. Do not make me wait any longer." A long pause stretched across the line, the tension palpable. Then, the CEO spoke again, his voice shaky with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You do not know who you are dealing with, Henry. You have made a grave mistake." Henry's lips curled into a cold smile. "I know exactly who I am dealing with. And you are about to find out just how wrong you were to cross me." The line went dead. Henry placed the phone back down, his eyes glinting with a chilling satisfaction. The CEO had no idea what was coming next. Henry had played his cards perfectly, and now, the final act was unfolding. As he leaned back in his chair, he allowed himself a fleeting moment of satisfaction. The world would soon understand the profound consequences of underestimating Henry Whitmore. It was no longer about mere money or power. It was about legacy. Henry was about to ensure that his would be the last name anyone ever remembered.